and welcome back to the Purple Sector's F1 podcast. My name is Kunal Shetty, and joining me on the podcast as always is unbiased fan and voice of reason, Shashank Shetty. Hello, Shashu. How are you?
Hi guys.
Hi. Unfortunately, we don't have the undercut queen today. She will not be joining us today. She's on vacation and basking in the glory of her coronation. So I think maybe we'll get her on the next one, but today she's unfortunately unavailable. So it's obviously the off season, and we thought it would be a good time and a chance for us to introduce a brand new segment that we like to call "In the Pit Box on the Spot." So what is in the pit box on the spot? I think that's a question people should ask. I mean, anyway, going to give you the answer, but it's a question you should ask. So the idea here is, we're going to look at aspects of the sport that don't get enough weightage and talk time outside the drama and the hype that's now, integral part of the sport. The circus of F1, if you like, what's outside, the happenings and stories and all which go around in the circus of F1 as we go through the season. So the idea is to go beyond that. And it's also a chance for us to look beyond the recency bias, cue in, the Drive to Survive public. And, put our podcasters, soon to be broadcasters, and guests on the spot. So it's also a segue into a little bit of historical, facts, figures, enlighten everyone, about what's happened in the sport before Drive to Survive. So I think that's the starting point, for this. We thought it would be a interesting conversation to have and bring out information. It might be informative for some, it might be boring for some, somebody else. But the idea is to get the information out, and what people take out of it is something that it's obviously for them to decipher and figure out. So today, on our first episode of In the Pit Box on the Spot, we're going to talk about the number 2 drivers. Your Irvines, Coulthards, Barrichellos, Fisichella's, Webbers, Rosbergs, Bottas's. Actually, Rosberg, we'll get into that. Rosberg, was he a number 2 driver? Let's get into that. And of course, Sergio Perez, a definite number 2 driver. Now, people might ask, but these guys are all number 2 drivers at, teams that have been in the fight for the championship or have won the championship. So we'll also get into that. But I think the starting point over here is, what is a good driver lineup? What is an ideal driver lineup? And it will obviously, differ from the teams in the front, teams in the middle, and teams fighting at the back. So that's where your number 1 and number 2 drivers come. I think usually a clear marker who's number 1, number 2 in the front running teams, because that's the way generally the front running teams have figured out the driver lineups. It's for discussion what happens in the mid table teams and what happens at the back end of the grid. So, Sashi, any initial thoughts on your number 1 and number 2 drivers? I mean, for someone like you who's also been following the sport for 25 years, I think it's a good opportunity to look back and just look at some of the drivers, look at some of the driver lineups, and talk about what was good, what was not so good, and what was blatantly bad. Any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I think first thing is good that we're doing it before the new season of Drive to Survive comes. And also second thing that I want to talk about is when do teams actually decide who's number 1 and number 2, and does this number 1 and number 2 change? And like you said, it's very interesting to see if teams in the midfield have a number 1 and number 2, and do they have a number 1 and number 2 when they're literally fighting at the back of the grid.
Yeah, that's the driver lineup. Yeah.
Yeah, that and the driver, yeah, the driver lineup. So
Hmm.
also, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it also changes throughout the season because I think, for example, it was if you take even Aston this season. I mean, Alonso was the number one for I think most of the championship. But then, as soon as I think Lance started doing a little better, even I think in the middle of the season, when not one race, I think when he had two consecutive, I think decent races uh,
P5s, yeah.
where he was P5, and also on top of that he was P5 and Alonso was behind him. So it wasn't that he was
Hmm.
just P5, so, but he was also in front of Stroll. So then suddenly people start talking about, okay, now who's number one and who's leading the team. Also, at second thing, now if you have somebody like a not an Alonso, but somebody who's a relatively older, and the other one who's a little younger, then
Experienced, yeah.
who do you actually give the number one or number two, or who do you give the team the title of team leader to? Is it somebody who's there right now, but who's probably not going to be there in the next year or two? Or do you give it to somebody who's relatively young in terms of race experience, but then who's going to be there for maybe not the next year or so, but maybe going to be there for the next 4 5 years in the team? So who do you give uh, that title of team leader to? Do you give it to somebody who's going to actually be there in the team for the next 4 5 years and going to develop the car, team, etc., and lead the team forward, or do you give it to somebody who's experienced, but for lack of a
Hmm.
better word, been there, done that, but not really going to be there with the team for a
That's
relatively
yeah. I think
longer
that's
period of
that's
time?
absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a very, very, very valid point. I think that's why driver lineups are hard. Like you said, it's easy to say someone with the experience. He should be the number one driver because he brings in enough experience. Because at the end of the day, it's a development sport. So the more you understand and know the nuances of the engineering side of things, you can possibly bring in a lot more. But I think it's a good time to quickly go back a little bit in history and look at those names that we talked about right at the beginning. Again, this is the starting point here being any team we can assume wants to be at the front of the track. And no one wants to I want to be at the back, I want to fight. The whole point of being in Formula One is to be winning races and championships. So we will come we will come to what happens when there is no option for you, but you're in the mid pack or at the back of the field. But just going to the drivers who we had mentioned, these are all famous number two drivers. Eddie Irvine, obviously with Michael Schumacher. You had Coulthard and Hakkinen. Coulthard was a strong number two, but was a number two who never really challenged Hakkinen, and that absolutely worked for that team. Not, I mean, absolutely the same thing with Ferrari with Irvine and Schumacher. Barrichello again through Schumacher's years of dominance, again the perfect number two. Fisichella with Alonso 2005 and 6. Now these were clear number twos, I think. And then I thought it started taking a little bit of a turn in terms of, it was a little bit of a gray area going into these top running teams, who was the number one and number two. Again, you could have, I mean, people could possibly have a difference in opinion, but I thought Weber started off as the older, like you said, someone who has more experience than Vettel.
Correct.
Someone who came in a little later, Vettel came in with a lot less experience. Obviously, oodles and bundles of talent. But before knew it, I think when at the start of that first season where Weber and Vettel were together, in my opinion, because Vettel had just about, he had won that race at Toro Rosso, but he had then been drafted into Red Bull. He was a number two, I think, which again comes to your point, where does
Right.
that shift sometime between the season? Because in your contracts or in your initial conversations with the team, when the team is set up for the championship, I think, your team principals speak to the drivers and say, this, I mean, most team principals be very open and honest, especially in your team, is trying to win the championship, that this is your job and this is your job. You don't get into each other's way. This person is our number one, so it could be number one, which also brings in, the better strategy in case, there's some kind of, tricky setup here in the race. The engineering also, usually the way the car has to be set up, or the development of the car is towards number one. And some things that might, as you go along, a lot of decisions, and if there's spare parts which need, or new developments which need to be put on the car, they always put on the number one car. But I think that's where, there was a slight shift, in my opinion, with Weber and Vettel. I think that's when, I think Weber was number one, and then he slowly, became like the number two, and he didn't take that lightly, because it was very clear to him that he was being shunned aside and everything was going towards Sebastian. And that's when you saw the Ajibajis, and what happened with
Yeah,
Multi
I think
21 and
Sebastian.
stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. Sebastian also has to take a lot of onus on that, because he kind of forced the team and
Correct.
the team bosses to make him
First
the number
hand,
one.
yeah.
And also, I
Yeah.
think it's a little difficult to choose a number one when a team is young. It also depends on, I guess, the age of the team. If the team is relatively new, then I think the team kind of I don't know, has a maybe an unspoken understanding that let's see how things go, unless it's a very 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 clear number one. I
Yeah.
think the
Yeah.
team also has an understanding that let's see where things go, and then we probably pick a number one or a number two. Sometimes this changes during the season at some point where there is a large gap, and there is somebody who's clearly maybe challenging for the championship. Sometimes a number one and number two could change even during the course of a race, because then if
Yeah.
there's somebody who's probably challenging at the front of the Grand Prix, then you're going to give probably the better strategy to the to the driver who's actually going to be challenging for the podium or for the win. So it's very interesting
It's
to
ever changing. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's
interesting.
ever changing.
Ever changing.
It's like it's like your goals. You have the 1 day goal,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
short term goal, a 5 year plan, and
Yeah.
literally a
Yeah.
plan
Yeah.
for your life, for your retirement. So it's so dynamic. It's very hard
Yeah.
to actually pinpoint that, okay, this is a number one and number two, and it changes only at such and such
Correct.
stage. It's so in the air.
Some great points again in terms of it being dynamic, and what are your goals as a team for the short term, for the midterm, and the long term. Now, that's again something that teams have to juggle. Do we plan for the now? Do we plan for 5 years down the line? Are we bringing in someone young to make sure that we got the right talent in at the right time for us? Maybe the car isn't suitable to winning world championship, but we feel we'll get there, and then at that point we bear the fruit of bringing in someone, and getting a driver lineup sorted, which gives us the best chance of winning. Just coming back now from go I'm not coming back going back into the into the history books post Weber. uh, then there was then we had obviously Mercedes doing its thing, and that's when you saw Rosberg for not majority, actually Rosberg was there for equal number of years when Mercedes won, and then Bottas came in. And there is again, I think a Weber and Rosberg were closer in terms of they became you know, di- not necessarily difficult for the team principal to manage, but it came to a point where there were this there were a lot of issues that started happening, and that's purely, I think, because either they hadn't defined a number one and number two, or like you said, through this season it became apparent that these both drivers are so close. I mean, the best shot as the head of the team, or as the team principal, is to give both of them equal shot, because at the end of the day, what pays the team is to be number one in the constructors championship, not in the drivers championship. So that's another very interesting point of part of the sport itself, is that you get paid for being top in the constructors, not in the drivers. Drivers obviously get all the accolades, and
Correct.
that's where it stems from. But so that's why for
Correct.
teams, I
But
think it's very,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I don't think too many at the racing competitions have two championships, where it's a
correct,
drivers' championship and a constructors'
and a
championship.
constructors championship,
So it's
correct. So
not only
unique.
it's not only a driver sport, but it is also probably sometimes it can be more a technical sport than a driver sport. That's probably very unique about Formula One, about F1.
About Formula One, absolutely. So that's in that context, I think that's when it becomes really tricky. So Rosberg obviously then won his title in 2016 and bounce. It was an incredible achievement actually to beat Lewis Hamilton in the same car. But I think he was mentally completely drained, so he decided to step away. And then I think you probably in the last decade, I think we saw the best number two a team could have in a championship winning car. I think Bottas was that person. He was fast. He was never as fast as Lewis. He was a great team player. Even if the odd time he was dismayed by certain decisions, I don't think, no. There was never a point where he and Hamilton came together on track or off track. There was nothing in the media. There's nothing to say that. I mean, Bottas might have had a few conversations with Toto and his team engineer and so on and so forth, but there was absolutely nothing between the two drivers. And I think that was probably Mercedes' masterstroke in bringing Hamilton and Bottas together. Maybe at the back end of that relationship also, Bottas finally, I don't know if Bottas even wanted a shot at the title at that point. Maybe he wanted to then become team leader, because if you see his career path since then, not only he's gone to Alpha and Alfa Romeo and all these, literally he's chilling there. I think he's just having a good life now. It's more, I think it's gone beyond just being solely focused on winning the championship. I think he cares more about just being part of a sport that he loves, and at the same time doing all kinds of fun things like a nude calendar and cycling away with his girlfriend all over the place. So I think he was, I think, one of the best number two drivers that a team fighting at the sharp end of the championship could have. And then you have a litany of really difficult moments for the number two drivers at Red Bull. Now the number two drivers at Red Bull and the number two seat at Red Bull, I think, generally is considered as a curse seat. Be it with Vettel and Weber at the back end, at the fag end of that. Then Ricciardo came and joined Vettel, and there was friction there as well. Vettel dropped the ball completely and he bounced to Ferrari. Then you had Max, who just came out like very fast, took on Ricciardo. Ricciardo couldn't cope. So then Max became number one, and then obviously,
Yeah, there were
your
just
number
newer
twos at
drivers,
Red.
young drivers
Yeah,
that
who
came
just
in. Yeah.
came in and came out, which is well documented. And so that number two seat, as much as I make fun of Sergio Perez, I think he's been the Bottas for Red Bull. I think they needed someone, especially in the first season. He really helped Max wherever he could for his first championship, I should say. 22, he was kind of there and thereabout, but he obviously didn't come second in the championship. That went to Charles. And then the latest season, now he's come number two, in spite of honestly having a less than optimal season. But yeah, I think overall the reason, I've been speculating on the podcast constantly that his time is up and Red Bull need to look ahead. But now that I look back, I feel that he might just stick around if he's at this performance or improves his performance by 10%, which honestly is not that difficult. His performance has been quite terrible, especially in qualifying. He's been awful. So if he improves 10%, I think Red Bull will stick to him because a number two which is like this, it just works for the team. And like you said, there is a constructors championship and a drivers championship. So the constructor champ pays your bill. So it's important to have a number two when you have a clear car that is your car that is well ahead of the field, to make sure that you keep someone who's not going to create too much of confusion and tensions within the group, and who's not uh, in most races even 2 tenths 3 tenths, not more than, I mean, maybe 2 tenths away
Yeah,
from
there
max,
is a
but
gap
not
of
that
two
much,
tenths.
very
Yeah,
close.
two
two
tenths or
tenths
three
two
tenths.
tenths 3 tenths.
They were kind of
So
lucky, I think, this season because they were two tenths, three
everyone
tenths
else was so far
apart,
behind.
but everybody else was half a second apart. So that's what they were a little lucky there, especially in terms of race pace. Maybe qualifying, there were other cars that
They can
came.
get away with it. Yeah,
Yeah, they came close, but I think race pace wise, Red Bull was way ahead. So they got probably a little lucky this season because of the gap in the race pace.
yeah,
And I don't know, like,
absolutely.
yeah, I think number two drivers also, it depends. It depends on the personality of the driver also. So, yeah, like you said, a Bottas was probably a little more chill or
Chill.
mellow. Yeah, very mellow
Yeah,
about just his
personality.
general
Yeah.
general demeanor was that way. So maybe that's why he was a number two. But then again, I think they're all Formula One drivers, and I don't think you can get to being a Formula One driver by being a non-alpha. So I think all of them have been
Want to be
alphas.
alphas. Yeah.
They have got to be alphas throughout their career to get to Formula One. So I don't know. Maybe you figure it out when you're in Formula One, or it's that point in your life career where you think that, okay, would I rather be in a top team but be a number two, or do I want to go to maybe a midfield team and probably
Be
be
the
the
number
alpha,
one.
the leader there? So, like I said,
Yeah,
it's so dynamic, and like you
it's
mentioned
tricky.
now, yeah, it's tricky. And then you mentioned alpha. So I don't know if we would have a clear number one and a number two in alpha. To me, both of them seem like number two drivers. There was no number one there.
And both
Both
were
of
not
them were
number
so,
one, both were
yeah,
number
yeah,
two.
both are number two.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was,
Which
I think, which is also for something for the teams to, I guess, think about, that you don't really want both drivers to
yeah.
be number two and not really want to take that little bit
You'd
of
rather
a
have them
bonus.
fighting to be number one.
You'd,
Yeah, you'd
yeah,
rather have them fighting to be
you'd
number
rather
one,
have
that,
them
I want
fighting to
to
be number
lead
one
this
and
team.
be, yeah, and be probably giving 110%, both of them giving
Yeah.
110%, than one that both giving 85%. I mean, ideally, you would want somebody to be at 110 and the other one to be at 95 or 100. But I'd rather have somebody
Yeah.
who's, or both of them who are at 110 than have both of them who are at 85, because that really does not take them forward, nor does it take the team forward.
This is actually an interesting segue. So yeah, like you said, Alfa Romeo is almost like a two number twos. So let's for a minute or two just get into beyond the front running teams or the teams that are gunning for victory. I mean, a lot of teams in the midfield, and then we'll go finally go to the back of the pack. So, what are the midfields looking at in terms of their driver lineups? Now, I would say Aston Martin was a midfield team which suddenly punched above their weight, last season. I think they got their driver pairing spot on. Obviously, Lance Stroll is the son of the owner, so they can't do anything with him. But again, what always counts in his favor is he's not a rookie. He's got enough experience. He's shown flashes of, not brilliance, but, he can do a job types. And then the big coup was getting Fernando. So I think that was a good driver when they said, we are a team that want to push up. We are looking up, which means so they're focused on bringing their wind tunnel and getting their facilities in order. And at the same time, let's bring in a driver who can possibly, because of his understanding and nuances of understanding engineering and how to develop a car and experience with, in the sport in general, how can we maybe expedite that, by
That
5-10%, which will mean, yeah, that process, because Alonso is not going to be around for Aston Martin winning a championship unless I don't think they're going to win a championship before 26, before the next rules come in. So maybe I think that was a good mix. The other midfield teams, I would say, Alpha Tauri is, again, they are currently running. Again, we're going by recency bias in terms of what the current midfield teams are doing. Alpha Tauri, I think, is being set up by Red Bull extremely, well in terms of this is a feeder team. It allows, I think, what people forget and what doesn't come out in the open that much is, while it's a finishing school for drivers to be then drafted into Red Bull, I think it's a finishing school even for engineers and, so on and so forth. So they almost put, someone like in the engineering side of things. That's why they've been giving them full autonomy in terms of, can you guys come up with your own car and come up with interesting solutions for your problems. And obviously then they get insight into, okay, this engineer, she has, come up with interesting solution, and it's almost like a good you know uh, finishing school for those engineers to then come back into the Red Bull senior team. So I think that for them,
Yeah,
that's a great setup.
yeah, and it's like a testing school for Red Bull also. So like you said, it's not only the driver, it's the drivers, the engineers, the strategists. So
Correct.
it's a good testing school for them. So they can pick and choose people who
Yeah.
they can probably recruit and get into Red Bull in the future sometime. So I think it's a great win-win for both
Yeah, it's a perfect setup.
Red Bull and for Alpha Tauri.
Absolutely. So that's why you have now you have Sonoda and Danny Rick. I mean, Ricciardo is someone with a lot of experience who went out of the sport, got back into the Red Bull, family. He's been given a chance. He's obviously he's yet to show what he can actually do. We'll probably know in the first, half of next season. But
Yeah, he's barely
one
been
more
there
thing I
half
want,
the season.
yeah, one more thing I want to touch upon for especially the mid-table teams is, if you're not punching at the front end of the pack, your driver lineup should be ideally, talented in terms of being fast, but at the same time have scope in terms of marketing. I think it's super important for them to have someone who can bring in,
Correct, correct.
marketing dollars, or brands who can associate, because that also becomes important for the team, because at the end of the day, it's if you can't win, at least as a business you should be making profits. So from that aspect, bringing in having a driver lineup with someone who's marketable also works. And then I don't know, you can tell me what you think about the number one and number two at a team like Alpha Tauri. But there is, I would say that they are both number ones at this point. Like how you said there are two number twos at Alpha Romeo,
Yeah,
at Alpha Tauris, I would say there are two number ones.
they're both number ones. I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, like, I mean, you agree on the marketability of the face, right? Because Danny Rick is seriously high up in terms of what
Yeah,
brands want to associate with.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think if you have somebody who's marketable, then obviously you're going to be able to get, uh, I think, more funds and money into your sport, and then that indirectly is going to go into you probably being or having a better chance of developing a better car for probably
Car,
the future.
yeah.
So it's all kind of related. So I think that the driver has to have three things. One is obviously your race,
Yeah.
your pace, your qualifying and race pace. Second thing, obviously you're going to be able to I don't know, communicate effectively with your team in terms of the technical side of the sport and see how you can develop the car. And third thing obviously is the marketability. So I think these are the three things that teams are going to look at while choosing a driver. Also, I think teams get into a championship with different goals. So a team like Alpha Romeo or Alpha Tauri know that they're not going to challenge for the championship, so their goals are different. So obviously the driver lineup that they are going to look for is probably going to be a little different from what
Yeah,
the
it's not
top teams
pure
are going to look
performance
at.
based
Yeah,
driver
it's
lineup.
not
Yeah.
just pace. So probably a Ferrari is going to not look at somebody who can develop a car,
Yeah.
but who is going to look at somebody who has raw pace or who has more of a pace advantage than somebody who's an effective car developer and a marketable person, because Ferrari as a team itself is quite a marketable and a glamorous team. So you don't, I
Brand,
mean,
yeah.
it's always good to have somebody who's marketable in terms of the driver being
Cherry
marketable.
on top.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a cherry on top. But then at the end of the day, Ferrari is a highly sought
He's a bigger
after and
brand than any.
marketable,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
marketable brand. So you're probably going to, keep that as a cherry on top. That okay, the driver is marketable, but I want to have somebody who has pace more than him being marketable.
So one more point, I think, which you mentioned in terms of the lineup is basis what the team's goals are, and also from a financial aspect. Uh, Again, a lot of fans and just generally people don't understand that there's a cost cap. There's a cost cap basically put in place so that you don't spend more, but it's not like
But
the smaller teams actually spend that 140. They don't have sometimes that 140. I mean, so any additional money that you bring into the sport, ideally you would not into sport, into the team, I should say, you ideally used to make your car better, make your car faster. And so whether that money comes in from a marketable person, or quickly get into the paid seat dynamic of Formula One, which used to be more of the case, to be honest. One thing that is surely better in the last decade or half a decade is the quality of drivers are better overall, as opposed to what it was at least when we started watching the sport in the late 90s.
yeah,
You
correct. They used
had
to have that class.
absolute,
You had people who were
yeah,
not classified because
really
they were
bad.
that 100 and
You're too slow.
106% rule. Yeah, you're too
7% rule.
slow
Yeah,
to.
it was very bad.
Yeah, you're probably so slow that you're going to be a little bit of a
Yeah,
like a
liability on
chicane
the track.
in the race. Yeah, so they don't want that to be a safety issue now.
Correct. So that still is there in terms of, I would say, I mean, Joe is, while he's decently talented, he's definitely bringing in money from China, which works for the team. Because at the end of the day, no one's an idealist. You have to look at paying the salaries of the people who are working at the team and make sure that you're running some kind of profitability, or at least close to that. Then you have, I think in the current lineup, one conundrum I have is with Alpine. I mean, it's confusing. it's the most confusing, team to look at. They have no one who's there in management for more than 6 months. I mean, higher level management. They got in a bunch of investors for God only knows what's the reason. What are they trying to do? And then you have obviously two drivers who are definitely no one wants to be called. I think it'll be an insult to call any one of those number two. They'll probably bite the hand of the reporter who's asking
Yeah, I
these kind
think
of
both.
questions.
Yeah, both of them are number one.
Th-
Again, not number two,
that's
but
a
both are number one
confusing
in
lineup.
Alpine.
That's a confusing team. But like you said, yeah, both of them are number one drivers. There is no
Yeah,
chance Ocon or Gasly is going to say no. I'm backing out of this, or I'm a number two. So in that also is one more reason to look at Alpine and saying, what the hell are they doing? Like, okay, if they were, fighting at the, actually they're fighting at the front also. I don't know how
it's such
that's
an
the worst run.
inconsistent team. Yeah, it's so
Inconsistent
hard
team,
to judge that
inconsistent.
team in terms of, like you said, the race, the management. Just it's a very
Just
confusing team, and then they got a bunch of people to invest in the team, and
yeah.
I don't know. It seems like they've taken that investment just because it's going to be beneficial to them monetarily. I don't know if any of those people who
Absolutely,
invested in
absolutely.
the team have any pedigree or any experience with racing or Formula One or any type of Formula One.
Absolutely,
It's a
100% agree.
fully 100% monetary based decision, I
Absolutely,
would say.
because these guys who've come in, like you said, monetarily they're adding, but they have experience of racing? Do they understand the sport? To be honest, inside out, like I don't know. A lot of okay, people might say how it doesn't matter that. No, I think it matters. You should understand the sport when you invest in a team. Like you should understand, bare
Yeah, you
minimum.
should
You
understand
don't need to get a
at
technical
least to a certain extent.
at to a certain extent. And I would say that a
Or
team which is, yeah,
yeah, or you would have, or you would have somebody who's probably going to contribute in the administration or the managerial level, which I don't think these guys have the pedigree for. So then,
I was just coming to that. Exactly what I was saying.
what are they here for?
What are they for? Now, yeah, I mean, I would say a team which is already poorly managed, too many cooks spoil the broth. Now you're bringing in more investors who would want to have a say in decision making, or so it's going to be even more confusing. People, I mean, there's no line of leadership. Who's at the helm? Who's taking those calls? Because at the end of the day, you have to take certain difficult calls, and someone has to take those calls, and whether they are right or wrong, at least there is accountability in the team. Key, okay, this person is taking accountability of a decision. You can at least work to correct that decision. Here it's going to be finger pointing. Who took that decision? It's fully chaotic. So, and these people, like you said, have no managerial experience, and they're all obviously sports stars and all in different walks of life, which is invested
Exactly.
money. So it is the most confusing team, and in a way I'm completely understand why Alonso ran from that team. I think he didn't he saw a completely different team to the team that he won those championships with. Again, like for a lot of the drive to survive Janta, they should just at least look into those archives and just not look at see those races from start to finish, but just understand that history of Formula One, history of these these teams, which are essentially all of them have such brilliant history to just look at and just understand where they're coming from, because the the
Yeah, I mean, if you
narrative
look at
and
history, yeah, if you look at history, I think the teams that have historically done well have had stable leadership. So,
correct.
right from if you look at McLaren had Ron Dennis for the longest time, where they had a great run, and
Yeah,
obviously Christian Horner has set a record which I did not know of, that he was in Red Bull from literally the inception to now.
they won. Yeah,
And we
yeah,
had John Todd, and then
yeah.
we had who
We have
was at the
Toto. We have
helm when Alonso was winning at Renault?
Flavio.
Flavio Briatore. So
Torre. Yeah,
he was, yeah, he was also
he was there
in
for a
the
long
team
time
for,
actually.
yeah, he
Yeah,
was in the team for a fairly long time. So you can see that having stability at
is
the
super
top
important.
is very important.
No, totally. I think totally agree with that. I think But that's why I keep saying, it's good to just look back, and also the narrative that's out there is in a certain direction. It's just good if you're a fan who wants to learn and understand, just go back and just understand, the likes of Flavio Briatore. Not just Ferrari, like a Ron Dennis. Ron Dennis was a pioneer. You had these brilliant people who had come into the sport, and a lot of these teams now, Williams became a laughing stock few years back when they couldn't get the car into testing. But a lot of people are like, oh, Williams is shit team. You don't, I mean, that's also like a it's a lesson in how great thing. I mean, every good thing comes to an end, and
Everything has to
there's
end.
always everything has to end, and that's where you have bounceability. Can you, because you will eventually fall. Now, how long it takes for you to come back is testament to how good you are as a team, and how big you are as a brand in the case of Formula One. That these teams, that they can get back and do their thing. So
Yeah, and I think
that's
I give
kind of
yeah
sidetrack from
I give
Alpine, but that's
yeah, but I give a full thumbs up to Williams to
absolutely
let
always
let go of the let go of the ego even now. They said that, you know
superb.
what, we've tried, we haven't succeeded, and it's time that
Yet, yeah,
somebody else who's probably going to be a little better at managing the team takes charge of the
yeah,
team, because you don't want to let the name of the brand
legacy,
or
and yeah,
the
absolutely,
legacy of
which
Williams go. So it's still called Williams, and
yeah, they
it's
took time
great
for
to
them
see
to
that
figure it
it's
out. Yeah, they
yeah,
sold off.
it
Yeah,
probably
they sold.
takes some,
Yeah.
yeah, it will take some
It'll
time for
take
them,
time.
like you said.
It will take
And
time.
like you said, you don't last at the top forever, but it's the same
Forever.
with,
Yeah,
yeah, it's the same with, you're not going to be at the bottom forever. If you have
forever.
people who are going to
Aspiring to go
let
ahead.
you, yeah,
Yeah,
aspiring to go ahead, they're
to
going to
go
be a
ahead, go
positive
back up.
influence on
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
then you can always go back to the top. So it's a never. And I think
It's never
Mercedes
full stop.
also
It's
is
only a
quite a, yeah,
comma.
Mercedes
Yeah,
also is quite a, it's a blaring example that they've been so dominant for the last 7-8 years.
yeah,
But then come 2022, they absolutely struggled. It wasn't like a
yeah.
it wasn't like, okay, they came down by a notch or a couple of notches. It was an absolute struggle for them.
That's the beauty. That's what, again, it's the same thing that in today's day and age, and the way, obviously influenced by social media, is just impair. A, you get a narrative. B, everyone likes to laugh at every little thing. Like, you haven't done anything in your life, but you bloody want to laugh at everyone. You don't understand, and with the sport in general, there's obviously viewing figures, and obviously very important, but viewing figures have dropped because of how good Red Bull were. I obviously, I mean, as a Ferrari fan, I would say, yeah, it was difficult to watch, but it is, Formula One will always be a technical sport. So it's almost, you have to look at drivers and driving on track with as much of awe as you would see with technical brilliance. I mean, this is technical mastery what Red Bull did last season. So it has to be applauded, and that's something which I hope fans get into that aspect of understanding the sport a little bit better, rather than just being on the surface of it and saying keep this that and make those judgments. So, which is now, just because you actually we spoke about Williams, I think we can just go to the driver lineups now at the back end of the field. Williams, I think they've kind of got it. I think they've got it right. I think they got Alex, a very hungry driver after his, you know, I think a little bit of, I would say a little unlucky in Red Bull. Hungry guy, got him into a team, pushed him up in the front, saying that you are the team guy who's going to lead this team. And I
I
think
think
they've taken
hungry
that
and a much more mature guy.
mature driver. And then you had, yeah, I mean, Nicholas Latifi, and like at the end of the day, like let's be honest, it's Williams were in the doldrums even financially. While that Darlington Capital invested the money, they needed an influx of money to come in from someone who could bring in some money. So Nicholas Latifi got it from as a Canadian driver. Then you have, I think, an American driver now is imperative for the sport that there's someone American racing, because as a as F1 goes more and more into America, I think it's imperative that some of these teams bring in a driver who's from the US. And yeah, Logan's, again, he's honestly not the worst. Again, people look at it and say he's an absolute joke, but actually speaking, he's better than a lot of those backmarker drivers from the late 90s and the early 2000s. So I think they've got it right. So they've got it right. We've already had a small conversation around Alfa Romeo, which I think they are as confused, not as confusing. I find it a bit confused in terms of what they are trying to achieve now. They are going behind rather than saying, okay, we're going to look ahead. And 100% agree with you. It seems like both of them are number two drivers. No one's like taking leadership of the team, saying that I am going to take this team forward in
Right.
terms of performance. Both of them are doing their own thing, and nothing's really happening. Which brings me now to the final team, which is on the
Our
current grid,
favorite team.
which is I mean the absolute. I mean, I used to actually feel empathy towards this team some time back, but it's a shit show at Haas. Like, it seems like a poorly operated, poorly run, demotivated, confused, don't really care about even trying any harder than they already are. Seems like a completely lost team. And Gunther Steiner has now just become, I believe he's taking on like some NBC or someone offered a role to him in some funny sitcom or satire or whatever. So I think this is probably the worst team on the grid. It shows on the points, and I don't think they're going to go anywhere. Also, they have I don't know what they're doing with their
Yeah, I mean,
resources. I
Gunther
don't know
got
what they're
what he
doing.
wanted, and I just feel a little sorry for the drivers because I feel like the drivers, at least on
But what
track,
do you
seem
think
like
about that
they're.
lineup? I have certain thoughts on that lineup. What do you tell me? What your thoughts on this driver lineup is?
I think. I
Number
don't know. I
one,
think I would
number
give
two.
them.
Who's what?
I again, I'm very confused with who's number one, number two. Do they have a number one, number two? It has kept changing, and I think the reason for that confusion is probably down to the management, like you said, and them being so all over the place that they don't really know which direction to go to. Do we have a number one, number two? Do we just have two number ones? Or do we develop a car keeping in view this driver?
Mhm.
I don't know. It seems like even their drivers are of a similar age, so it's not like what they're looking forward.
Correct.
Also, where there is one younger driver and there is one driver who's probably a little older. So both of them are of a certain age who'll probably think of retiring at the same age. So where is the team headed? Like I absolutely do not see any direction.
Absolutely hit the nail on the head. I was also just coming to that in terms of their driver lineup. No number one, number two. I completely agree. Both of them are similar drivers, similar stages of their career.
Similar age, yeah.
So, similar age, everything. Like, I would put Hulkenberg ahead of this guy, though. Shit, what the guy's name on? What is this nonsense?
Magnussen.
Anyways, Magnussen, sorry. God. But that's how disinterested I also got with that team. That how can I forget one driver's name? But yeah, Magnussen, Hulkenberg definitely I think has slightly of a upper hand, but there's no number one, number two. I'm sure that coming to the larger picture, don't seem to be going anywhere. And specific to the driver lineup, like you mentioned, I would say, while I obviously have a soft spot for Mick, I think Mick made far too many mistakes. Without saying keeping Mick, I think if they were a team that was seriously looking at, the future, saying planning for even the mid or the long term, they would not have a driver lineup like this. Um, they would go a Williams way, saying that get a hungry driver in, show him a path as to where they're heading, because I don't think they're getting interest from any of the, and Alex Albon wouldn't have considered Haas also, because he doesn't see any potential in terms of they wanting to achieve something or go anywhere. So I think an ideal lineup for their ideal lineup would have been, a mix of someone like an Alex Albon. I don't know who that is on the grid, or bring someone in from F2 and give him that seat and say, this guy is going to push us to, go ahead. And have then maybe like Mazepin was a very bad choice, but bring in, a Logan Sargent type of driver who, and the American team, it would be great. American team, American driver, get in the money, get in the finances, and get that popularity and just build on that. Obviously, that Gunther, for the Drive to Survive fans, though, he's like he's a big deal and people love him and all, because he's got that personality, being funny and abusing and all of that. But as a team, I think that's probably got one of the worst. I mean, poorly run team. Plus, I think the driver lineup
I
doesn't
would
make sense.
probably
Driver lineup doesn't
not
make sense.
just yeah, I would probably not discard Mick Schumacher also. Why not just get Mick Schumacher back? He's probably going to be a little more mature. Like we also discussed, he's probably going to have a better pace. I think he's also going to be better at developing a car now because of just the pedigree that he has now, the lineage that he has, and also he's going to be marketable because of his surname Schumacher.
Surname, yeah. It's a
So
good bet.
why not have Schumacher come in? Because clearly, I mean, you did not even remember Magnussen, because it's not like, yeah, I mean, you will remember
Yeah,
somebody, even like a Logan
yeah,
Sargent, you will remember
yeah.
him because even though he wasn't doing great, it seemed like he was at least
Trying.
trying his
Yeah,
hardest, and he was probably crashing in the process. But
yeah.
it clearly showed that they were at least trying something. This was like literally they weren't even trying. It was
Yeah.
just that, okay, let's just go. We have a race. We're going to put two cars on the grid. The grid positions 19th and 20th is literally it's like it's reserved for them. So they might as well not even
Yeah.
take part in the qualifying. They are always knocked out
Yeah.
in Q1. So why not just get a Mick Schumacher back in?
Yeah, actually, Hulkenberg at least did some good job in qualifying, but then it was literally
Qualifying.
he himself in the post qualifying say, we know where this is going. Like, it's the race pace is going to be 1.5 seconds slower than Williams. So it's yeah, he should try. I mean, that's why I rate Hulkenberg way ahead of Magnussen. But yeah, I think the Mick Schumacher thing, I think again, very interesting point. I think yeah, he was crashing a lot. I would say he's way more talented than Logan Sargent. Uh, but yeah, he was possibly crashing because he was actually saying, I'll try to be at the limit or go beyond the limit of this car and see how it goes. Because he wanted to showcase his skill and show that I can do a Hulkenberg and get the car into P7, P8 where it should not be. He probably didn't have the expertise and experience of Hulkenberg to manage, the car in a way which, didn't go that 0.1% overboard to crash. But I think he would have done a, decent job, and like you said, the Schumacher name would have brought
Yeah.
money, all of those. I mean, I don't know, it was a brainless decision.
Yeah, and now that I think about it, I'm thinking about it from the point of view of Mick Schumacher. So I don't know if I would be comfortable with going and joining a team like Haas if I were Mick Schumacher, because I don't know, if your team is not going anywhere, then is it
Yeah,
really
why
going
would
to
you
be
want to?
beneficial to your career if you go and join a team which absolutely has
Especially if
no
you're
plan
young.
on the table?
Especially if you're young. Especially if you're
Yeah,
young.
yeah,
Young
I
and
would
hungry.
say Haas would do great to get a Bottas there, because Bottas is
That'll
on
be a
his
big coup. Yeah.
yeah, it is. Yeah, it's really on his
You
way
know,
out. So,
what will be the offer? It will be a Bottas will
yeah,
say,
it'll be
we'll do a
yeah,
nude
three
calendar
new
with Gunther
calendars.
Steiner. That only it's become like the team has become like this only. That Haas team is a joke, man. So so unlike F1 in the sense that the spirit of F1 in a way is like just not being met by that team. It's so bad. Cool. I think we'll just do a fun kind of session for the. This is before we close this. On the current grid, I'm just going to give you the team names. You tell me number one or number two. Whatever. I'll just read one name from the team, and you have to say number one, number two. Okay, starting with
Yeah, please.
Max Verstappen. Number
Bro,
one
this
or
is
number two?
difficult. I mean, yeah,
We'll
I
say
don't know.
number one. We'll say number
It'll be
one.
hard to find somebody
Number
who
one.
says Max
Yeah.
is anything but number one.
Cool. What about George Russell? Number one, number two.
Number two.
Number two. George won't be happy. He'll ring you today. How dare you say it? Carlos Sainz. Number one or number two?
Number one. I would say both
Number one?
ones at Ferrari. I would say both number ones at Ferrari.
Highly controversial.
It's hard for me to pick the number one and number two in Ferrari. I mean, at the start of the season, I would definitely have said Leclerc number one.
I actually would say at the end of the season it's very clear it's Leclerc number one now. I think in the
Actually,
middle.
yeah, I think in the middle it was Carlos, but yeah, I think towards the end of the season again.
And from what I hear, he's getting another 5-year contract, Charles. So I think they've also decided that they have to just focus on one driver and they go in the way Ferrari have won championships before, which is to have an Eddie Irvine and a Barrichello of sorts. Carlos Sainz is way ahead of any of these guys, so I don't think Sainz will stay beyond this
Yeah, correct. So
contract.
that's what. Like even if you say Charles number one, I would find it
Yeah,
difficult.
he's
to say
1.5
Carlos number
Sainz.
two.
Yeah, I won't
would
call
say
him a
yeah,
number two.
Sainz is not a number two in my books.
Cool. Lance Stroll, number one.
Number one. Already number
In
one.
his father's side also, I think he's not number one. Okay, McLaren. So let's take up Lando Norris. Lando's number one, number two.
Lando number one. Yeah, number one.
Yeah, pretty obvious. Very obvious number one, I would say. Other than Max, I think one of the most obvious number ones. Alpine, like we said, there's no number one.
there's
Alfa
no
Romeo,
number ones.
two number twos. Two number twos. That is just so in sync with how that team is.
I think one more
Then,
team which has a very clear number one is Williams. Albon number one.
Yeah, Williams has
It's a very clear
Albon has
and
number one.
two there.
Alpha
Yeah.
Tauri have two number ones, and Haas have two reserve
Number
drivers.
threes. Yeah. Yeah, reserve drivers are also called number threes.
Who do weekend drivers? Yeah, what number one number? Yeah. So I think that's it. I think we'll just open this up. We'd love to hear your comments on number two drivers in general and on team lineups. What do you guys think is a great driver lineup at the front, mid, at the back of the field? And just specifically number twos, there have been some fabulous number twos in the yesteryears who've come up with that one performance out of the hat which will actually blow your mind. It's something that you guys should actually look back 20-25 years into Formula One's history, because there are some fabulous number twos in terms of performance and personalities. You should also look up Eddie Irvine. If he was in the Drive to Survive era, he would have 3 times the following of Gunther Stein. That's all I'll say.
And he actually did have the pace also, Irvine, because
Yeah, he was pretty fast. He was fast.
He was fast because after Schumacher had that crash and had to stay away
He
from
took
the
it on.
sport for a while. He took
Yeah,
it on,
yeah,
and he
yeah.
almost was the champ.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he was quite a good number two to have. But yeah, I think that concludes our first episode of In the Pit Box on the spot. I hope you guys liked it, and we'd actually really love to hear some of your thoughts on number two drivers. I think that's an interesting conversation, and something that I think is integral to the sport. I think there's number two drivers on the driver lineup. It's super interesting to see team principals coming up with the best strategy and solutions to have the driver lineup sorted. So yeah, that's it. That's about it for this episode. We'll see you again. So see you. Bye.
Okay. See you guys.